In baptism, Jesus is speaking to the believer, to the assembled congregation, and to the watching world, identifying this person with himself in death and burial and in resurrection. And so in baptism, what you have is a sign of an execution. It's a sign of a drowning. This is the reason why when Jesus is baptized, John the Baptist can't believe it. Jesus comes to him and says, I want to be baptized by you. And John says, no, I need to be baptized by you. Why is John so alarmed by this? Well, it's because of what he's doing with baptism. He's saying, you're a bunch of snakes. You need to come under the judgment of God. And in baptism, what's happening? Well, water is scary. You go underwater, you can't breathe. It's a picture of death and of the grave, and always has been biblically. The flood, God floods the world. That is a baptism, Peter tells us, 1 Peter chapter 3. God sends Jonah into the deep, into the water. It is his judgment upon Jonah. God ultimately baptizes the world with fire and engulfs and immerses the world in fire. So when Jesus says, I want to be baptized, John is alarmed by this because this is the sinless Son of God. And it makes no more sense than someone saying, I really would like to be on the federal sex offender registry. You would say, why would you want to be on that list? Why would you want to identify yourself with these snakes who are under the judgment of God? But of course, Jesus is doing exactly that, not because he has sinned, but because he's identifying himself with sinful people. So when someone is going down into the waters of baptism, first of all, that person is confessing, I deserve death. I deserve the judgment of God. Jesus, through his church, is saying to the person, yeah, you're right. This is exactly what you deserve, is death and the grave. But the person is also acknowledging, I am trusting in the power of God to raise me from death. And Jesus is affirming that in the physical act of the person being brought under water, can't breathe, death, and then being ripped out of the water by a power that doesn't belong to him. There's a power that's coming from the outside, bringing that person up. So that person now is identified with Jesus in his death, Romans chapter 6, in his burial, in his resurrection. The person also is acknowledging, I was dead in trespasses and sins, under the judgment of God, buried, but I am now raised to newness of life because I'm in Christ. And the person is identified with that final reality of dying and being buried and then having one's name called and being brought up out of the grave. That's a physical, visible sign of that. And so what happens in baptism is that Jesus is claiming this person as his own through the church, and the church is announcing this is the boundary marker. This is one of ours. This is our brother and our sister, which is why in the New Testament you don't have any such thing as an unbaptized Christian. Those who believe are baptized. And in the churches, the Apostle Paul says there's one Lord, there's one faith, there's one baptism, one God and Father of all. So baptism is extraordinarily important. This is the initial rite of the Christian's obedience, but it also is a sign that builds up the faith, not only of the person being baptized, but of the rest of the church community as they're watching the gospel and they're hearing the gospel sloshing around in the water. Jesus has given that to us because he knows we need to see it, we need to experience it, we need to be reminded of it. And every time we see baptism, we're reminded we're at war and we're to take this gospel to the ends of the earth, discipling the nations and baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit.